Hey, just so you guys know, this is the entire story of my playthrough of the Hall of Shores Dwarf. This is a series that I've done through episodes and just kind of put together large formats of these in 10 to 20 year videos. So this is the entire story. This is the 100% playthrough. Now, quickly before this starts, I want to say thank you to the 1,500 of you, at least while I'm sitting here editing. There's 1,500 plus of you that have subscribed to my channel recently, and I just want to say thank you so much. I really appreciate it. There will be much more of this style content coming out. If you want to check out more of it or see more of it, just subscribe to the channel. It's going to be all right here. With that, I hope you guys enjoy the video. What you are about to watch is the rise of the Hall of Shores Dwarves. This is a fortress I started on a saltwater beach, and somehow these dwarves have become masters of the giant animal and bears. We've defended off dragons, giant birds, hordes and hordes of goblins, humans, and dwarves alike. We fought off the undead spawned from a necromancer's hands, and yet we are still standing, even after burying hundreds of our kinsmen. Now, before we get started, I do want to say thank you so much to the almost 1,100 of you that are subscribed to my channel. It means the world to me. And if you enjoy this video, please leave a like, subscribe. It helps me out a ton. Now, let's get into it. Welcome to the Hall of Shores. This is a fortress created by the Archland dwarves off the side of an ocean. I decided to do this because I've never played on the side of an ocean before. I've never played with salt water in Dwarf Fortress, so this was brand new to me. And as you can see, I didn't have a whole lot of trees to work with, which really concerned me going into this. So this starts off like every other Dwarf Fortress playthrough, and we are going to dig a hole into the side of this hill, and we are going to start building our base. So we're going to drop down a few levels, give us some vertical space to work with in our base. So just like every other playthrough, we're going to change the tasks for each dwarf. We're going to go in and do all of our standing orders and kitchen orders. And we're going to create a quick pasture on top and put all of our animals into it. I'm also going to put a couple dogs down here in this hallway to protect my dwarves. So to start with, I start building a farm, and I also start building our first stockpile of our main room. The main room stockpile will be for just about everything, and it will be surrounded by workshops, and obviously up here at top, we are going to go ahead and build some farm plots. Here are some of the workshops going in. And I like to do these very symmetrical builds when I do my main floors where all my workshops are at, just to make it as efficient as possible. The first couple workshops going to go in are going to be the carpenter's workshop. It's going to craft all of our wood items, and also our stone workers. And these are going to do our thrones, our tables, doors, everything with stone. They're going to be doing it. Plump helmets are already in the ground and growing, which is great. And we're just going to keep working here and start adding more things like stills. We're going to add more things like kitchens, the butcher shop. And this will start to produce more food as we get to butcher animals and create meals. And with the butchering of animals, that comes some little byproducts like leather and like bones and skulls, which the crafts dwarf will use to build jewelry. We're also going to build a gem cutter's workshop. Like every Dwarf Fortress playthrough, we have to add our automatic task, which you see that I'm doing right here. And there's a lot of them. Now, adding a couple pastures underground, I did bring pigs. So pigs do not need fungus or grass to eat, so they can live underground from day one. And midsummer of our first year, we do get our first group of migrants. This was about 8 migrants. Which also came in with a lot of professional people. They had some skills to them. And here we're going to go ahead and build our first bedrooms. I like to do mine in groups of 10. I find it's just easier to do the math, and I can quickly do the work orders for them. Now, after that, we're going to go ahead and build our dining room. This is going to keep our dwarves really happy during this playthrough, and they are going to enjoy eating here. As we come into autumn, our fortress is coming along very nicely. And while I was building my metalworking area, the mountain homes decided to send the first caravan of the playthrough. So I went ahead and finished up placing down some furnaces and also our metalworker before going up and trading with them. Now, I didn't have much to trade at this point. I didn't have the gems that I wanted, which I usually trade, but I did have a lot of turtle shell jewelry, which I went and traded for some very basic goods along with some rough gems that I had, like more picks and a few plump helmet spawns. Soon after, while delving deeper, we hit our first cavern. Now, this cavern was pretty expansive. I decided to dive a little deeper and closer to the fresh water. And with this, fungus started growing on our first floors, so I was able to bring in the yaks underground. I then found out that there was a reptile species living down in our caverns, so this is going to provide a very formidable opponent when we do decide to expand. After realizing I had no coal or lignite in any of my layers, I decided to get some wood furnaces so I could start burning wood into charcoal and producing metal bars. And diving deeper, we found a magma pool, which upon investigation was just another large cavern with not much in it. But diving a little bit below that, we did find some semi-molten rock. Back within the base with a little bit of coal and some metal bars, we decided to start creating some armor and weapons for our dwarves. To protect our base, we decided to make a trap hallway. At first, this was populated with stonefall traps, which are a very effective way to protect yourself very early in the game, but they are one use and then they needed to be reset. Next, a temple was in order. Our dwarves needed somewhere to pray to their gods to keep them very happy. Understanding that these stonefall traps are one use before they needed to be reset, we decided to create some serrated discs out of copper, and also some copper mechanisms to go into the trap hallway and give us some weapon traps. And with these serrated discs will be tearing through any enemy that decides to walk through this long hallway. With the basic functions down of the base, we are now going to create a tavern. This is a very important part of the base as you get some visitors that will tell you about their travels, tell you about things going on in the world, and also it keeps your dwarves very, very happy. They get to socialize within your base, and this is always a good thing for them. Later into our second year, the dwarves of the mountain homes came back with a caravan where we got a couple animals in cages, and we also traded for a few more anvils to add to our metal production. With some excess stone, we decided to start laying down some floors and making the base a little bit nicer. We also added some wells down into our cavern where we can pull fresh water and our dwarves can wash themselves and to provide fresh water for medical uses. And maybe this is foreshadowing, but we also needed fresh water for any wounds that we may get in future encounters or battles, which happened when a giant Olm decided to come up out of the water and try to go up into the base. And quickly our military dwarves were sent down to dispatch the Olm. After wounding 2 dwarves, it tried to make its way up into the fortress before quickly being dispatched by one of our axe dwarves. After knocking it unconscious, he managed to slay the beast by decapitating it. And with the story of the Archland dwarves and the Hollow Shores fortress just getting started, I am really excited to see where this takes us. I thought maybe it would be another peaceful year, but I was proven wrong. It did not take long for our population to explode, wonders to be discovered, and enemies to come forth. Let us waste no more time and let's get into the story. Now, to start off, we created a barracks for our melee infantry. We were still gearing them up and supplying them with recruits, but we did need a place for them to train and store their gear. Like I said, we didn't have many weapons or many pieces of armor, so we went ahead and started to put in some work orders for some. Gearing up our dwarves with metal armor is very, very important. But to get metal, we did need to get more production when it came to metal, so we started to dig around and poke and prod and try to find this magma pool. Our dwarves got sent off into different directions to try to find warm stone. And eventually we hit it. Now, with this magma pool discovered, we were able to go in and put magma smelters in and put magma furnaces in, which would greatly increase our production of metal, allowing us to smelt and refine and craft without having to burn wood from the surface, which we already don't have a lot of. So we cleared out a large room and we started to punch holes in the floor below to have access to the heat from the magma. Placing our workshops over them, we were now in business. This allowed us to completely demolish and disassemble our upper crafts room, moving all of our anvils, our stockpiles, and our production down below to the magma. I decided to go ahead and put a dining room in. Our dwarves working down there were almost 150 floors below where we started at, so they did need food down there. Early summer, we did have some human traders come. We also had our very first artifact, which was a large gem, a red zircon. So after we built a temple and dedicated that temple to the Order of Dusk, which was gaining a lot of worshippers within our fort, we had to elect a priest, and I also went ahead and threw the new artifact in there, which greatly increased the value to over 10,000, which made this a temple complex. After that, we went ahead and appointed a new priest for this temple. The mountain homes came back and said that we were now an official land of the realm, allowing us to appoint a baron, which obviously our expedition leader had been filling in for that role anyway, so we're going to go ahead and appoint him. Upstairs, we added a few more instruments to our tavern to try to bring in some guests, which we were not getting a lot of at this point. Mid-autumn, all hell broke loose when a weremole child attacked our fort, sending our soldiers up to the front gate where the beast was trying to get into the fort and wreak havoc amongst our dwarves. Thankfully, some trader, caravan, merchant guys ended up stomping out the beast. Now, a couple of our dwarves did get bit. That would mean in the next moon phase, they would become weremoles themselves. With our gem cutter getting bit at least 8 times, we went ahead and expelled a clothes maker, and then we ended up locking up at one of our cooks that got bit in the hospital. The gem cutter also had no family members, so it was very easy to expel her and get her away from the fort. And with the cook trapped away, she could safely transform into a weremole all she wants. She will be stuck in that little room. Next, we had a thief goblin enter the fort. He did not last long as the bunch of dwarves absolutely obliterated him. And again, the cook transformed into a weremole. I kept trying to get my Marks dwarves to go down there and end her, but it seemed like they just didn't want to move, and I could not understand why. They did have weapons and bolts, but she would transform back into a human before I could even get people down there to get rid of her. Finally, though, I did end up getting them both down there on a station order, and when she transformed, I set them to a kill order. Now, this Marks dwarf went 25 for 25, piercing the weremole every single shot. It was bleeding out. It had no hope. And then our Marks dwarf ran out of bolts. Running off to find more, that is when the weremole transformed back into a human, regaining its full health and losing all injury. While I waited for another transformation, we went ahead and made another barracks room for our Marks dwarves. We also added about 20 bedrooms for our growing population. We were currently around 55 dwarves, which is up from 17 at the start of the video. With the weremole transforming back, I could not get my March dwarves to act on any of my commands. When she transformed, I figured this was good a time as any to just go ahead and expel her. She was a single family member, so it was just her that had to leave. And then some elf merchants showed up, and this was very, very exciting to me because with them they brought a giant black bear. Now this black bear was soon to be a weapon of war for the Hollow Shore dwarves. I quickly threw him in front of our front gate where our dogs used to patrol before they were killed. And quickly he saw his first taste of combat. Two thieving dwarves decided to march right into the front gate where they were promptly met with our giant black bear, causing the second dwarf to run in a panic after seeing its friend absolutely dismantled by a giant bear. The bear had taken her friend's leg and shook her from side to side until she was no longer alive. And with his first kill, we promptly named him Grimfang. Soon after, in late summer, we decided to send off our fully staffed and fully iron-geared dwarves on their first mission. Now, we decided to go raise a nearby village that had less than 10 people as a quick, easy campaign. Upon their return, we found that it wasn't goblins that actually held the camp, but an undead dwarf, which we couldn't manage to kill. He kept getting back up. And the loot honestly wasn't that good either. One iron anvil did come of it, which we will put to good use, and a copper bookcase for our future library. Back underground, we worked on a couple guild halls, and also a few more temples, using artifacts that we built and putting them on pedestals to increase the value of each room. The fortress was now bustling with over 92 members. Obviously, we kept having to add more bedrooms for our growing population. With an increase of idle hands, we decided to go ahead and start polishing up our main floors, making our dwarves much happier. Not knowing just below them, a forgotten beast had entered our realm and hunted like an alligator under the water, taking out multiple crundles. The forgotten beast was the least of our worries as a vile force had entered our lands from our border. 8 goblins and 2 kidnapped dwarves marched upon our fortress. They were goblins, but they were pretty skilled foes, and 2 dwarves falling in behind them, obviously brainwashed to fight their own kin, did worry me a little bit. Quickly they descended into our trap hallway. This was the only entrance into the fort. As they went through the hallway, they were cut down quickly by copper blades. Stonefall traps crushed their bones and their skulls from above. And yet they still rushed in, the dwarf leading the way. The skilled dwarf had evaded all of our traps so far. It was almost like he recognized his kin's handiwork. With goblins being cut down all around him, the dwarf charged forward, until a serrated blade caught his shoulder and ripped the tendons off, making him drop his weapon in the process. And soon after, he was caught by more axe blades, unsuspecting while he was injured. The goblins, upon seeing his body as they entered that hallway, decided to run, getting cut down on the way out also. And with the easy victory that our trap hallway provided, we sent out a cleaning crew to go pick up any weapons and armor that our foes had left, and also to go bury the bodies. The Hall of Shores stands 1 year older. Now, the fortress has been coming along great, and it's not the problems within the fortress that we are actually having issues with. It's the problems coming from outside of our own borders. We started off this year with creating our second melee infantry squad, filling it up with new recruits and giving them metal armor and weapons. Now, I had no idea how much conflict they were actually going to see within this year. They were almost completely unprepared. In early spring, the dead walked into our lands. The Necromancer's Tower from nearby had resurrected plenty of undead dwarves, and they now marched upon our fortress. We went ahead and put our melee infantry squads in the buffer room, where they would be our last stand against any enemies coming through the trap hallway. This undead force was full of 21 undead creatures of dwarf, elf, and human blood. Their rotting corpses were just barely held together by armor and leather straps. And quickly, with our gate closed, they decided to descend into our trap hallway. The undead creatures were not the fastest or the most mobile, but they did move with purpose. They were in our trap hallway in just a matter of seconds. Our traps went to work. Our stonefall traps would break already rotten bones and dent the metal armor that they carried. Our weapon traps quickly dismembered them and cut off limbs, tearing through limb, bone, and rotten flesh alike. It seemed that a couple of the dwarves did move a little bit faster than their fellow zombies, but they were still cut down all the same. They did end up killing one dwarf, one of our clothes makers. He was caught on the surface when we shut the gates, and he did not make it back in time. After the majority of them had died, we sent out our military to finish off the stragglers. They made quick work of the 2 or 3 zombies that stayed above the surface. We then sent out the cleaning crew to pick up any metal bits of armor that the zombies had left. The rotten bits and pieces of our foes were thrown into an atom smasher, one of our new garbage disposal systems that we used within the fort. Snatchers still braved our front gate, and as they rushed in, they actually bypassed our guard animals. Setting the military upon them, they ended up killing one of the Snatchers. And up above, our bear Grimfang actually got one of the dwarves as it ran through. They weren't as sneaky as they wished they would have been. Also, a dog got a kill on a goblin. So promptly, we named him Warhound. A human caravan arrived where we traded them a lot of shell and bone, jewelry and crafts, and we traded for a lot of food. Down below a forgotten beast, a skinless iguana made its way beneath our fort. Now this beast did not have as many kills as most forgotten beasts did, but it was still a threat none the least. After getting attacked by a horde of zombies, it was time to do a counterattack against the necromancer themselves. We knew where their tower was, we knew where they lived, so we sent out a military group after them to see if we could manage to kill the necromancer to put an end to these attacks. When the military group arrived back, we actually did manage to kill the necromancer, along with 30 undead dwarves and 10 undead humans. What we did not know is that they sent 53 more undead creatures shambling upon our fortress soon after. Now, 2 fishermen were caught on the march of the undead. They ended up dying, but they were not resurrected due to there being no necromancer in these war parties. Again, the zombies descended upon our fortress and to our trap hallway. An undead dwarf clad in armor rushed through our halls, being faster than all the other ones and getting caught into a metal cage trap. The rest of the undead creatures began shambling through the trap hallway, their rotten flesh stinking its corridors. Our traps did their job, cutting down the undead beasts one by one as they made their way through the hallway. A lot of these undead creatures carried lots of valuable armor and weapons with them. We were down to our last cage trap also, so there was a chance our military would actually see combat during this siege. As the zombies got closer and closer, our dwarves prepared for a fight, which they got when the zombie broke through the hallway and they went and cleared out the trap corridor, slaying 7 undead dwarves as they went. Our cleanup crew was sent out to pick up all of the armored bits and reset our traps, already preparing for the next fight. These attacks of undead creatures needed to come to an end. We had other things to focus on, and fighting zombies was not going to be one of them. The counterattacks went pretty well. A lot of undead creatures were slain, and a little bit of loot was collected from the necromancy towers. Still in the early spring, 31 goblins charged our fort. Our military could not catch a break this season. Declining their petitions for a loss of life, we decided to go ahead and fight them. Closing our gates, the goblins made the same mistake that the mindless zombies did. They charged our trap hallway. They were much quicker than the undead creatures, but they were cut down all the same. Our stonefall traps breaking bones and necks, while our weapon traps dismembered them and tore off tendons and cut meat from bone. Weapons and shields dropped to the ground as their arms carrying them were dismembered. There were lots of kidnapped dwarves that had grown up believing they were goblins coming to fight their own kin. But they were cut down all the same as the green scum. After rapidly losing, the goblins and the kidnapped dwarves decided to retreat, climbing over the bodies of their allies and swimming through pools of bile and blood to get out of the fort. The cleanup crew went about mopping the floors, picking up armor and weapons that we would then use for our own armies, and obviously resetting our traps. Hearing how rich the Hall of Shores fortress had become, the humans sent 3 full trade wagons to our fortress, bringing along with them a female grizzly bear, which obviously we would trade for and put her in the hallway with Grimfang, our giant black bear. Midsummer, we were attacked by a bird that was larger than the dragons of legend. I had never dealt with this foe before, so I was very interested to see what this creature was. Closing our gate, I watched as the bird flew in from our borders with rapid pace, killing 5 of our dwarves, including our legendary gem cutter, which deeply hurt our fortress and our production of valuables. The bird itself had over 55 notable kills from other fortresses spanning all the way back to the year of 31, 69 years before our fortress was even founded. The giant bird was eventually cut down by one of our gem cutters as it buried a copper pickaxe deep into the bird's skull, rendering it lifeless. After finding the gem setter, we gave her a title that she had greatly earned, the Bane of Feather. With more and more dwarves being slaughtered outside of our gates, we decided to add a couple tombs to the fortress. After realizing our artifact hall was not going to be a good enough location, I went ahead and built a place that I would call the Heroes Hall. This hallway will display the heroic acts of our dwarves for all to see. So we went ahead and moved the now skeleton of the giant eagle up to the hallway, which a child carried, and it weighed over 36,000 pounds. In midwinter, another giant dragon-sized bird decided to attack our fortress. The giant rock Teofima flew from our borders and quickly made her way over to the fortress, where our spear dwarves quickly met her. After piercing her multiple times with iron weapons, she decided to fly off for a moment and try to regain her strength. Quickly, she realized she could not leave here without a fight and returned back to our dwarves. The dwarf wielding the spear that put the bird out of its misery decided to name the weapon Besmar Dimshosh. The giant eagle laid next to her kin in the Heroes Hall. These 2 corpses were now on display for all to see within the fortress. Again, a dwarf child carried it up to the Heroes Hall, this one only weighing 26,000 pounds, an entire 10,000 pounds less than the previous one. Another year has passed here in the fortress of the Hall of Shores. The Archland dwarves will always welcome you with open arms when you arrive. And yet this was not a year of gratitude and homemaking, but a year of conflict. Hopefully there are brighter seasons ahead of us. The year 106 started with a beast that I had never seen before, a dragon, Osnoth Angot. Magical and fire-breathing, she descended upon our fort with haste. Closing the gates, this huge reptilian creature descended upon our fort. Though this dragon was sickly with low stamina, she had over 90 total kills over her lifespan. She dashed into our trap hallway, which was the only entrance into the fort still. Gathering the corpse, we brought it up to the Hall of Heroes, where it will lay for the rest of time. And while trading with the elves soon after the dragon's death, we were notified that there was a were-giraffe coming into our fortress. Again, pulling the lever to try to keep it out, we found out that it was already within the trap hallway, and it was too late to gather some dwarves back to the fortress. A couple of our dwarves fought tooth and nail with the beast in the trap hallway. The military was sent after it, yet the traps themselves within the hallway are what cut the animal down. with one of our mechanics, Asmil, getting absolutely obliterated by this beast. His face, neck, back, and chest mangled beyond all recognition. Quickly, we carried him over to the hospital, where he was going to rest up. Mid-spring, the Hall of Shores became the capital of our civilization, with our king, Cadil Odamshodok, arriving with his entourage. Quickly, we built him a large bedroom, office, dining hall, and throne room, with all the furniture fit for a king. Ashmil, the mechanic that fought with the were-giraffe, actually turned into one himself. Somehow our doctors missed a bite mark, apparently. Ashmil, the were-giraffe, got in a fight with 5 of our dwarves before the military could arrive, but our 5 dwarves put him out of his misery. And again, our doctors failed us, missing a bite mark on one of the other victims, and there was another were-giraffe transformation within the fort. The humans soon arrived with 7 full wagons of trading. Along with them, they brought another stray black bear, which we traded for and added to our growing army of these animals. From below our fortress, the forgotten beast Togabe Leto Atok climbed the stairway up, torturing and killing our miners as it went. This enormous feathered toad with fire breath snuck into the fortress from an entrance unknown to us. With so much fire, smoke, and death and vile being thrown about, this fight took over an hour to finish up. The military was sent after the forgotten beast, but had killed so many miners down below. Over 40 of our fellow dwarves were slaughtered by this forgotten beast alone. It roamed every hallway, breathing fire down every corridor, stomping out any dwarf that came within reach of it. In its craze, it was burning its own flesh, melting the fat along its body. That's when a swords dwarf named Thicket added the beast to the history books. Another win for the Hall of Shores dwarves. With over 40 dead, we needed to go ahead and start burying them. Thicket, the swords dwarf, earned himself the title Sword of the Beast after killing the forgotten beast in the caverns. The corpse of Leto Atik, the forgotten beast, was placed within the Hall of Heroes, right next to the dragon corpse from earlier this year. Thicket earned himself a tomb amongst our greatest of royalty. A vile force arrived in the next season. There wasn't many, but it was enough to warrant a response. With lots of dwarves that they had kidnapped from other regions, they charged into our trap hallway, which again was the only entrance into the fort with the gate closed. The traps did their job, the serrated blades cutting the enemies down, separating limb from body, the stonefall traps knocking them unconscious or breaking bones underneath them. The Axe Lord Dwarf, hearing the calls to come back to the fortress, attempted to come through the trap hallway, where he was then caught and cut down by the enemies. Hearing this, our military was sent out after them, and the military cut them down swiftly in retaliation to the death of one of their own. The elves arrived. To them we traded our cut gems, and they brought along with them a giant fox, which we figured would be a great addition to our buffer room just after the trap hallway, giving us another warrior to help fight. From our depths crawled another enemy, a forgotten beast, Azok, an enormous one-eyed tick with a trunk and bloated body. It snuck up again from an entrance unknown to us. This creature also breathed fire like the last. Again, it climbed up our staircases, killing every miner and passerby that was traveling in and out of the caverns. Yet the beast was cut down by a spear dwarf named Zuton. The spear dwarf earned himself the title Bloodgorger's Bane after killing the forgotten beast in the shape of a tick. The corpse of the beast was carried up into the Hall of Heroes also. Needing a fresh water source that was safe after finding an entrance that the forgotten beast was using to get into our fortress, we ended up creating a new water source. a pool that could be locked off to keep them from climbing into our fort. After trading for another grizzly bear, the bear pits were created a couple levels below ground, where we will now breed grizzly bears to use in battle against all of our enemies. These bears will hopefully fight side by side just as ferociously as the dwarves that are with them. While building in the caverns and trying to set up a base of operations down there, a forgotten beast snuck up upon us. As it rushed in, smelling new prey in the caverns, our military dwarfs stood at the ready. An entire squad then charged the beast, where we discovered that dwarven steel reigns superior regardless. With a dwarf Ficked ended up slaying the beast, earning her the title the Slayer of Damu, which all dwarves will now know her by. And after slaying the beast, she renamed her sword a title that was most deserving. Then the corpse was placed in the Hall of Heroes along with all of the others, and a statue made in resemblance of the beast. The elves came back. Once again we traded cut precious gems to them, and once again they brought us some giant animals to put in our buffer zone. This time a giant dingo and a giant raccoon will join our ranks. We also had the birthing of our first grizzly cubs, a set of twins, male and female. These will be trained into war grizzlies here very soon when they mature. With the growing population, we needed to expand the bedroom hallways. 30 new bedrooms were created for our mini dwarves that had been moving in the last few seasons. The military was set out on a new mission. We needed to expand our population into other regions, other fortresses, to leave us a small buffer between us and the goblins. So the military was sent out to raid the nearby settlement Roof Rims. And soon after, once we raided it, the settler squad was sent out to go ahead and colonize the land of Roof Rims. They created a local government there called the Axe of Crewing. Zos, our admin, became the administrator over there also, leading the dwarves. After their loss at Roof Rims, the goblins sent out a counterattack. They marched upon our fort once again with many kidnapped dwarves amongst the ranks. With the drawbridge up, they descended into our trap hallway. The mix of human, dwarves, and goblin scum marched through our trap hallway, getting cut down once again by our well-crafted traps. The stones dropping upon their heads, the serrated blades from underneath them dismembering them and letting them bleed out into our hallway. A woodcutter named Adil got stuck on the way back in, and our military, hearing that, charged into the hallway to claim vengeance. Quickly, their master-crafted shields, swords, spears, and maces went to work in the hallway, cutting down our foe one by one. Most of the dwarves going into a blood craze after seeing a fellow dwarf cut down. When the elves returned soon after in the spring, they brought with them another giant black bear, which we traded for, now creating what will be known as the giant bear pits, next to the bear pits that have already been created for the grizzly bears. This is where we will breed our giant black bears, including Grimfang, an already legendary bear that we have had guarding our fortress for several years now. Knowing that our fort has been conquering enemies left and right, we needed to expand the Heroes' Hall, because these pedestals will soon be filled with the corpses of our enemies and the statues of tales long gone. Now, while we were working on the Heroes' Hall, we sent out another raiding party to the Tower of Glazed Chestnut, where we had killed a necromancer just a couple years ago. We also sent out a settling party soon after. The settling party made it and went ahead and started building a fort. So the Tower of Glazed Chestnut was no longer held by the enemy, but held by fellow allied dwarves. This gave us 2 lands nearby that would start to build up as the years progressed. For the last couple years, 7 wagons from the humans and their traders have been sitting in our entrance to the fort. Building a bridge, we decided we were going to smash them as soon as possible to get them out of the way because they had blocked a dwarven caravan. They had been told to leave but yet chose not to, so we would retaliate. We called the dwarves back into the fortress, that way we knew everybody was safe, and we went ahead and pulled the lever, smashing all of the traitors, and quickly, the ones that did survive spread out, attacking every dwarf within range. Our military was sent up after them to clean up what was left over. We cut down the humans and their beasts alike, with no remorse. All of their trade goods that they had brought with them was now claimed for the Hall of Shores dwarves. While doing the cleanup, a werewolf child marched upon our fortress. After calling everybody in, the werewolf child chased one of our people into the fort. Following closely behind, he actually managed to dodge one of our traps. The werewolf child was stomped out quickly, but he did bite the miner, so he did have to get expelled from the fort. A new tavern was built on the first floor for everybody to enjoy. This tavern was an upgrade from the one a few floors below, which will now just be for our dwarves and long-term citizens. In the last few years, the Hall of Shores fortress has seen both friend and foe arrive on our shores. From the friendly humans and elves coming to trade fine goods to cyclopses and two-headed giants. The Archland dwarves have grown stronger, and the Hall of Shores fortress has grown right along with them. Late spring of the year 110, a cyclops called Ogok arrived. She was 359 years old. She rushed from our borders, headed straight for our fortress. For some reason, she jumped over the opened gate and sat on the surface of our fortress for just a little while before finding a papermaker to chase and slaughter. Soon after she killed that dwarf, our spear dwarf found her, piercing her brain with an iron spear. She was added to the Heroes Hall and a statue made in remembrance of her. A couple levels below, our bear pits have produced many cubs. The dwarves are starting to suspect that the giant bears, Grimfang and the female black bear, are not going to breed. Early summer, the giant cat braved call attacked us. This time we were a little bit quicker, able to pull up the drawbridge, protecting the main fort and its entrance. The giant named Cat made her way across our land to our trapped hallway. Quickly she descended and was crushed and cut by our stone fall and weapon trap. She did not last long, not even a single turn into the trap hallway. She was added to the Heroes Hall and a statue was carved with her depiction. Soon after the giant died, Doran, a miner, went crazy in our tavern after getting too intoxicated. I don't know how he managed this, but he ended up killing 10 dwarves and sending many more to the hospital after a long brawl. The military was finally able to grab their weapons and cut him down, but blood and bile filled our hallways. The elves arrived with more giant beasts, this time a giant badger sow, which we traded for, and they also brought a cheetah, which we traded for to add to our buffer zone just below the trap hallway. While trading with the elves, a glazer named Xanog went crazy after drinking again in the tavern. Toppling an altar and a lever, he was sentenced to 87 days in prison, but the group of dwarves in the tavern made sure he would never be able to serve the sentence, stomping him to his death. A few floors below, we have started to place new flooring and new walls made of dacite, trying to make the Hall of Shores fortress a better place to live with more quality of items around the dwarves. They all worked very hard to place all of these floors and walls, and this is a project that will be ongoing for the next few years. Back near the trading hall, we opened up a new area to place bins of finished goods because ours had been filled up. And a few hundred levels below the trading hall, we've started to mine around the magma pools in search of better gems and better metals. Near the old tavern, a new library was being constructed. Hopefully this one will be much nicer than the one a few levels below, which now long-term citizens and our dwarves will only have access to. Early spring of 112, a giant with 2 heads named Odos arrived in our land. So we pulled up the levers, pulling the drawbridge up at the main entrance. Little did we know an elf merchant caravan was actually headed to the fortress also. Odos quickly found this caravan, slaughtering one of the elves before it had freaked itself out, and it ran away terrified of the battle that was brewing around it. An elf merchant chased it for a little while, trying to harm the beast, but eventually just gave up. The large 2-headed beast spent some time running around the surface, not knowing quite what to do, before it finally decided to find the entrance to the fortress in the trap hallway. Now before he can make it there, a group of citizens armed with pickaxes and axes dismembered and disemboweled the beast before leaving it to die. The elven caravan was carrying 3 giant animals, which was actually on a horse that was killed. The elves ended up running away, leaving us with a giant possum, a bird, and a langor monkey, which will now defend our fortress just off the trap hallway. The new library was finished with construction, and we named it the Palace of Diamonds. Also, our heroes' hall was getting filled up with giants and cyclopses and 2-headed beasts, with statues built to remember them all by. Now, this is something I have never seen in a fortress before, but one of the dwarves was actually possessed by a ghost. After laying the ghost to rest with the memorial slab, the miner was just fine and actually had no thoughts of it. Though our memorial slab hallway has been growing long recently, and so have our tombs. We may need to expand this in the future if dwarves continue to die. In the caverns, we found a column of fine jewels which we really wanted to mine. When we mined it though, the cavern collapsed a little bit, actually killing one of our dwarves named Aerith. She was one of our miners. Just on the other side of the caverns, a forgotten beast named Strawn, a one-eyed newt that could shoot webs. I had been eyeballing this for a little while because I noticed he was injured from a previous fight with a forgotten beast. I sent the militia squad the Thorns of the Earth, who had been practicing for a couple years and had not had a good fight recently. I sent them down into the caverns to station. Little did they know a forgotten beast was just below them in the water, stalking them like a crocodile. The forgotten beast ended up jumping out of the water, seeing the dwarves on the other side, and given my dwarves the kill command, they knew exactly the fight that was coming to them. A mace lord dwarf named Monum leaped through the air, holding his steel mace in both hands overhead. He was caught by a group of webs and was quickly dismembered by the beast, dying almost instantly. A sword master named Thicket swung his iron sword in an arch, lopping off the head of the forgotten beast. The humans arrived soon after. We had plenty of bins of finished goods that we had not traded, so we traded them all to them, leaving them a profit of 76,000 value, which they were very ecstatic about. A couple floors below, the Heroes' Hall, the first one, is complete. Every dacite pedestal filled with an accomplishment of the Archland dwarves here in the Hall of Shores Fortress. Statues built to remember what the beasts look like, even though they may now be just mangled skeletons. A third barracks was built for the Fondled Treaties, a new militia squad adorned with iron armor and iron weapons. This will soon be another skillful militia squad that we could use to defeat our foes. Midsummer of 112, a giant named Asa arrived. Asa quickly ran from our borders, heading straight for the trap hallway. With the gate pulled up, she had no choice but to run through the thin hallway adorned with traps. I sent the militia squads after it, but the weapon traps did their job a little too quickly. She didn't make it past the first one. She was sent to the Heroes' Hall, and a statue was built in her depiction. The last few years has been eye-opening for the dwarves in the Hall of Shores. They have lost so many kinfolk, yet gained so much. A new declaration of war had been signed. There was no turning back now. The dwarves had struck first, launching a surprise attack on the distant civilization, the Goblins, to the east. A beast of legend emerged from the depths, a massive warthog-shaped horror that tore through the fortress, leaving dwarf carcasses scattered throughout the halls. Yet even as the fort mourned its losses, the war escalated outside. A raiding party sent to a distant goblin city returned with a prize beyond imagination, a fierce and unbroken dragon. This beast's arrival marked the turning point, a change in the morale of the war. The foe was stronger than the dwarves had previously thought. The fortress prepared for battle, the fate of these ocean shore-bound dwarves now intertwined with that of fire and hate. Our story starts in late winter of the year 112. After spending some time digging out our cavern, I noticed it had been a while since the goblins had last attacked us, so we're going to take the battle to them. Sending out 2 squads of our most able-bodied dwarfs clad in iron armor, we went to attack the fortress of the Shady Steppes, hopefully prompting the goblins who live there and their civilization to send a counterattack. So our dwarves set out on the raid mission that would take multiple days. After returning, we found out there were only 2 goblins that were killed in the raid, so we sent out our 3rd militia group to go settle the fortress, granting us another land under our dominion and expanding our borders as a civilization. The goblins did send a counterattack, but for some reason, the group that they brought retreated as soon as they entered our borders. Now what they did do was send 3 thieves to our fort. The dwarves just figured it was a scouting party, with a larger force soon to come. The three thieves rushed into our fortress where they were promptly met with grizzly bears and dogs who had been trained for war. These thieves did not last very long as their pools of blood littered our hallways and our front entrance. Mid-spring of 113, with the goblins not sending a whole lot of troops to fight, I decided to attack and declare war on a new goblin civilization, hoping that they will come and wage actual war against us instead of sending scout parties and thieves to attack us constantly. Below in our caverns, a forgotten beast named Zagstock was fighting 10 reptilian folk who had tried to claim the cavern for themselves. The giant spider-like creature fought with them till the end, taking several life-threatening wounds from the spears and swords of the reptilian folk. After the battle, the forgotten beast crawled into the water and passed away alone and cold, bleeding out into the underground ocean. Early summer of 113, the humans came with another large trade caravan, where we traded them a huge surplus of barrels of prepared meals and bins of finished goods made of bone. We traded it for new seeds, pile of fish, and library materials, leaving them with a profit of about 43,000 value. Just on the surface to the right of our trade post, we started a new construction, which will be a 3-story building with gardens at the bottom where we can now grow new plants and not just the dwarven staples like plump helmets and dimple cups. A forgotten beast. Its massive form squeezed through a fissure down below in our caverns, its gray jagged scales scraping across the stone. It was a warthog, its bloated belly a hideous sight, and its eyes held the most terror. Eyes that gleamed with hunger and malice. As it crept upward, the beast's hooves clattered on the stone steps. Moving ever closer to the dwarves above, when it reached the lower levels where the miners brought their ore to the smelters, the horror began. The dwarves barely had time to scream as the beast unleashed thick and sticky webs, ensnaring them where they stood. Trapped and helpless, they were dragged toward its maw, their blood staining the stone floors and staircases below them. The warthog beast was relentless. Its strength seemingly endless, 37 dwarves fell in its path, crushed under its weight or caught in its webs. Their bodies were strewn across the stairs they had so often climbed with oars in their hand. As the battle dragged on, the beast's strength began to wane. Its blood, thick and black, oozed from countless wounds from our dwarves. Pulling on the stone stairs, it faltered, its massive form slowing. And with a final shuddering gasp, the warthog beast collapsed. It bled out there on the stairs, its body heaving one last time before it lay still. The beast, Ebra, the scaly warthog that had crawled from beneath our caverns, had taken many dwarves. Her carcass was hauled to the Heroes' Hall, where a statue was made depicting the animal. This is going to be a day that the dwarves of the Hollow Shores will never forget, and soon they went about burying their kinfolk and holding their rituals over the coffins. Soon after the disaster that was the forgotten beast, Ebra, our dwarves finally returned after attacking the new goblin civilization. With them, they brought back 4 beaked dogs, but also a cave dragon. Now, this was very interesting to our dwarves because this means that the enemy had dragons in their possession, tamed beasts that could easily destroy our fortress. And with our lowered population due to the forgotten beast Ebra, this was not a good sign. The good news was that we had at least one of them. How many they had, we don't know yet. But our fortress needed to prepare for the fact that the goblins even had these beasts. The goblins must have figured out that we had stolen one of their dragons because soon after our militia arrived back with it, a vile force arrived. Now this was only about 5 or 6 crossbow goblins, but clearly they were searching for something. Quickly, they sprinted across our territory and made their way into our trap hallway. Now, our trap hallway has stood for 13 years now. It is a proven, reliable way to cut down our enemies, and our traps did their job. Dismembering goblins, disemboweling them, and just breaking the morale. Quickly, they retreated, but one of them was heavily injured and moving slowly. So, the Halls of Glee, who had just returned with one of the dragons, set out to cut down these goblins as they fled. Managing to catch the one that was heavily injured, the rest of them made it out. Hopefully, they will go home and tell of the horrors that they found here, and they will send a larger army next time. Early autumn of 113, the Minotaur named Engo arrived. She ran so fast across our territory, we actually couldn't get the gate closed. So she made it into the fort using the front door. where quickly she was met with our dogs, giant black bears, and grizzly bears. Surprisingly, it wasn't the giant black bear Grimfang, or the other giant black bear who has yet to get a name that ended up killing the Minotaur, but just a dog. The dwarves were all surprised by this, but a foe had been avoided, and that carcass was brought to the Heroes' Hall, and a statue of the Minotaur Engo was built in its depiction. The animals on watch didn't have any time to sound the alarm before a were-giraffe lunged into the front entrance. Its elongated neck and gnarled limbs moved with unnatural speed. The dwarves soon discovered that the werebeast was not just an unknown foe, but a former member of the Hall of Shores, who had returned to wreak havoc among the halls once again. Attis Evist, a spinner, was infected years ago and expelled from the fort. She had made her return. Grimfang the bear charged forward, but the werebeast was too quick and too strong. The clash was brief yet brutal, the bear's mighty claws raking fur and flesh before the were-giraffe's jaws clamped down on Grimfang's throat. The dwarves could only watch in horror as their beloved guardian Grimfang fell. His life spilled out in a pool of blood. Grimfang is honored with a masterfully carved golden statue in the Heroes' Hall. The beast Attis, the were-giraffe, lies next to him, her image carved in silver to show the dwarves the horrors of the world outside. A few levels below, we started construction on a new dining hall. With copper tables and beautifully crafted thrones, I think the dwarves are really going to enjoy this, and it is a huge upgrade from the previous dining hall. While construction on the dining hall was going, two thieves broke into the front gate. They thought they had gotten past our bears, but that just simply wasn't the case. The grizzly bears and giant black bear mauled these two thieves before they could go anywhere else, chasing them room from room until they were no longer. Another vile force attacked, this time only 5 goblin crossbowmen. Clearly, the goblins had not received our message saying, "Bring more," and they still sent 5. Just like the last ones, these ones were all too eager to find themselves in our trap hallway, where they were quickly cut down by weapon traps and stonefall traps. As they crawled over their friends' remains and body parts, they just found themselves in another trap. This time there were none who were too injured or too slow, and our military wasn't able to get any of them. Hopefully this time when they arrive back home, they decide to come back with more. Fighting these goblin parties of 3 or 5 is getting a bit boring for our dwarves, who have spent years and years now training. In a brief month of peace, we decided to start building a new temple room. This is going to house 6 temples total, which should all be temple complexes once we add artifact rooms to increase their value. This temple is going to be full of copper altars and copper statues due to the fact that we have over 2,500 bars of copper just kind of laying around. Again, the humans arrived and we traded for seeds and items that we could melt down into iron, such as iron anvils or their large armor and weapons that our dwarves cannot use anyways. We also traded for a little bit of lumber. At the end, the humans profited over 33,000 in value. To the Hall of Shores dwarves, this trade was more like an offloading of useless finished goods and prepared foods. A war is brewing in the Hall of Shores, where mountains are hollowed out and the seas rage below. The Hall of Shores, once a beacon of dwarven might, now stands on the brink of oblivion. The relentless tides of goblin forces crash against its gate, but the dwarves are no longer the force they once were. Morale was destroyed with the giants' arrival and sieges of goblins, but yet the dwarves faced a more insidious threat than their enemies. They faced extinction. For reasons unknown, the flow of migrants from the mountain home has halted. The once bustling halls now echo, leaving their remaining dwarves to wonder, will they be the last of their kind? What could have caused this sudden isolation from the mountain homes? This is the story of the Hall of Shores, a tale of survival, sacrifice, and possibly the final stand of a civilization on the brink. Will they endure? Or will they be lost under rock and brick? I hope you will join us today as we go through the next few years for the Hall of Shores dwarves. Our story starts late summer of the year 114. It had been a while since the goblins had attacked after the war declaration. The Halls of Glee, one of our best militia squads, led by veteran dwarves with grizzly bears at their sides, set out to the settlement of Work Malice, where the last cave dragon that we stole from the goblins was found. Obviously, the dwarves of the Hollow Shores would like another cave dragon, possibly to start breeding them, so they set out and were hopeful to find another. This mission would take roughly 2 days to go to Work Malice and come back to the Hollow Shores. Once the Hall of Gleeds left, we went ahead and started building new floors down in the old temple rooms next to the tombs. It needed a little bit of an upgrade as it used to just be polished stone. But since we did move the temples upstairs a little bit, we have plenty of space to now start building new constructions down here, and make them a little bit nicer. The Hall of Gleeds returned after raiding Work Malice, the settlement to the east. A grizzly was the only combatant to actually kill a foe. This time, this grizzly killed both a human and a goblin during the raid, and we lost no dwarves nor grizzlies. But we didn't bring back any loot. So maybe we stole their only cave dragon. 2 bears who had earned their names by killing foes at the gates of the Hall of Shores was assigned to other soldiers within the Hall of Gleeds, hopefully giving us a few more weapons of war to send out on raids. And almost as the bears could sense it, the dwarves inside also knew what was coming. The goblin horde advanced to the territory's borders, their beak dogs snarling and snapping in the air. The goblin's eyes gleamed with malice, eager to claim the dwarves' riches inside the fort. They rushed into the twisting corridors of the trap hallway due to the gate being closed. Inside the fortress, the dwarves had braced for the onslaught. Only one military squad was ready to defend the Hall of Shores. The Halls of Glee were out on a mission. The Thorns of the Earth, the militia squad, a stalwart but young group of warriors. They tightened their grips on their weapons, prepared to meet the invaders head on. It'd be a brutal fight. The goblins outnumbered them, and their beak dogs were fierce in battle. The goblins charged through the long, twisting hallway, their war cries echoing through the stone corridors. The clash of steel and the roars of the beak dogs filled the air, and the Thrones of the Earth knew they'd meet them at the bottleneck. When the situation seemed dire, a war cry was heard from the entrance of the trap hallway outside. The Halls of Glee, the militia squad, had returned from the raiding mission. Hardened by years of battle and led by seasoned veterans, they brought with them fearsome allies, trained war grizzly bears, ferocious on the field of battle and their loyalty to the dwarves. Without warning, the Halls of Glee struck the goblin force from behind. The goblins caught between the 2 squads were thrown into disarray. The dwarves fought with renewed vigor, while the grizzly bears tore through the ranks of the goblins and their beak dogs. The dwarves of the Hall of Shores pressed the attack from both sides, crushing the invaders in a perfectly executed ambush. When the dust settled and the last goblin fell, the dwarves stood victorious. Not a single dwarf nor bear had been lost. The fortress remained secure, a testament to the dwarven courage and the strength of their unity. The goblin siege had been broken. The Hall of Shores remained unbreached, but its defenders were more determined than ever to protect their home in this war. Right after the siege, a handful of goblins showed up. Now, this wasn't a giant army full of goblins and beak dogs that could actually pull off a siege. Some of the dwarven soldiers were convinced that they had assumed that they would have won, and this was just a group of intelligence or some extra reinforcements, possibly even builders to start building in their new home. What they didn't know was that the rest of their army was gone, very few of them even escaping our borders, and they fell into our trap hallway just as their kin did. Our traps ripped and crushed through the copper and iron armor. These bowmen stood no chance, and a couple of them just retreated after a while. Early spring of 115, the humans arrived with another trade caravan, this time bringing a handful of wagons and a bunch of horses following them. They'd always bring us extra seeds after hearing about our new garden room, but we also traded for their large iron armor and iron anvils, which we then smelted down into iron bars to craft our own goods. We sent them home with a profit of over 27,000 value. Knowing we needed to counterattack after that huge siege that the goblins sent us, they sent the Hall of Glees out to a settlement called Hexdishes, where the Hall of Glees, led by our veterans, led a few more grizzly bears who had just recently been assigned to them. The Hall of Shore dwarves are known worldwide for their ability to train grizzly bears. With a couple of our animal trainers are very, very good at it. The grizzly bears spend a little bit of time at the front gate guarding the Hall of Shores until they earn a name by killing foes. Once they have that name, they are assigned to a soldier in one of our militia squads. And it doesn't take long for these bears to earn their names. Like right here, when 3 goblin thieves decided to enter the fortress and run around for a bit. Our bears chased them from room to room and finally got a hold of them, with 2 goblin carcasses littering our front hallway. One of them was killed by dogs within the bedroom level. The 2 bears that did get the goblin kills up top were unpastured and then assigned to the Halls of Glee soldiers. We decided to do a little bit more upgrading while we had the time. A couple of windmills were placed outside of our new garden room, and underneath them gear assemblies and axles powered new millstones just underneath the windmills. Now, the dwarves of the Hall of Shores knew this wouldn't quite be enough for any future projects also, but it was enough to power the 4 millstones as of right now. To start construction on future projects though, they started to add floors and pillars to help support the garden building. This was a 3-story building that on the roof they were hoping to build more windmills to help power more new machines within the fortress. Though construction on the surface was busy, the Hall of Shores stood silent for a moment. The dwarves had prepared for this day, fortifying the fortress with every trick and trap their ancestors had passed down. The goblins, however, were relentless. Driven by dark hunger for dwarven blood and treasure, they had already attacked the fort just earlier last year. The goblins surged to the fortress's outer defenses, only to find themselves funneled into a long, narrow hallway, a trap-laden gauntlet designed by the dwarves with brutal efficiency. As they pushed forward, the hidden mechanisms were triggered. Razor-sharp blades of copper and iron swung from the traps, slicing through the ranks of goblin soldiers. Stonefall traps rained boulders from above, crushing those who dared to venture further into the hallway. The goblins pressed on though, their numbers dwindled with every turn. Through sheer numbers and determination, the goblins pressed forward, the ranks thinned but the resolve unbroken. They reached the inner door of the fortress where the true test awaited. Behind the door, the dwarven militia squad stood ready. They could hear the goblins approaching, echoes of their footsteps growing louder in the hall. With a thunderous roar, the dwarves threw open the doors and charged into the fray. The two forces collided in the clash of steel and fury. The dwarves fought with the strength of desperation, knowing that their home and families were at stake. The first wave of goblins was met with dwarven steel, and many fell before they could even raise their weapons. But the cost was high. 3 brave dwarves were lost in the initial onslaught, their blood staining the stone floors of their fortress and their iron laying still. As the second wave of goblins poured in, they found themselves facing the force of dwarves emboldened by the memory of their fallen comrades. The dwarves' axes and hammers fell with relentless precision. Cutting through the goblin armor and flesh, the goblin forces faltered, then broke entirely under the dwarven onslaught. Not a single goblin survived the second push. As the last goblin fell, the siege was broken. The surviving dwarves stood bloodied and unbowed, their fortress secured once more. They mourned their fallen comrades, but victory was a testament to the strength and the indomitable spirit of the Hall of Shores. The goblins had been driven back once again, and the dwarves would live to see another day, their fortress unyielding against all those who dare to challenge it. While still cleaning up the previous siege down below, the wind farm was constructed on the new garden building, supplying power throughout the fortress for several new machines to come. Hearing that the Hall of Shores was still standing, the humans sent more caravans. Hauling supplies like seeds, lumber, iron, and cloth, they traded with the dwarves, who sent them home with bone crafts and prepared meals, profiting the humans over 17,000 in value. In an effort to raise the moods of the fortress's population, we installed some new masterfully crafted green glass windows up in the temple rooms. Hopefully the dwarves will enjoy seeing these as they pass by to pray to their deities. And once again, the bears got an opportunity to earn a name as 3 goblin thieves entered the fort, all of them getting absolutely mauled by our bears. A couple grizzly bears earned their names and their assignments to the Hall of Glee's militia squad. With an artifact hallway getting a little crowded down below, we started building a new one, a larger one that will have copper pedestals to display the artifacts of the fortress. And yet, almost as if the world knew that we were not prepared for another attack, Umcest, a giant. For decades, he wandered the wilderness, a solitary figure of destruction driven by an unending hunger for violence. Now his sights were set on the Hall of Shores. His massive frame barely fit between the stone walls, but he pressed on. A row of hidden circular blades shot out from the trap, slicing into his flesh. The creature bled out in the hallway. The dwarves were sent to collect the massive corpse and showcase it in the hero's hall upstairs. A metal crafter was set to forge a copper statue resembling the giant. A group of goblin giant hunters, 5 strong, had tracked the giant into the fortress, where they too were victims to the trap hallway, 3 of them being cut down or smashed by our traps before the other 2 had retreated. The artifact room that had started construction when the giant attacked was finally finished, laid with lead floors and over 50 copper pedestals. This will now be home to any future artifacts that are crafted within the fortress. Within it also laid copper statues of heroic dwarves from the past of the Hall of Shores. While history will only write about the construction of new rooms, the conquering of settlements, or the winning of battles, I'm going to show you that we have to now clean up. Dwarves were sent down into the trap hallway to start picking up bones and pieces of flesh and carcasses from enemies. Throwing them into the atomizer, we tried to salvage as much as possible, but this will be a long, probably year-long process. Welcome to the Hall of Shores, a dwarven fortress locked in desperate struggle for survival. Nestled deep within the ground along an ocean coastline, the Hall of Shores has faced relentless attacks from goblin forces, defending their walls and their way of life. But their troubles don't end at their gates. The dwarves have been anxiously awaiting word from their mountain home, Pulley Sizzled, a once great stronghold that has gone silent in recent years. No migrants have arrived, and the long-expected trade caravan has never appeared. With their numbers dwindling and their resources stretched thin, the dwarves of the Hall of Shores finally discovered a grim truth. Goblins had overrun Pulley Sizzled, and the dwarven kin are missing. Faced with this horrifying reality, the dwarves launched a daring and desperate assault on the fallen capital, risking everything that they had left. This is a story of a fortress on the brink, a people fighting for their future, and a battle to reclaim what was once theirs. A story that will fill the history books and the tales that will be told in all corners of this land. Our story starts here in the early summer of year 117. The dwarves had started a new construction on one of our first few floors where the hero's hall lay. This needed a new branch to add some more pedestals to the hall. While that was going on, the humans arrived with a caravan full of goods. We sent them away with over 127,000 in value in profit. This also left our administrators wondering where the caravan from the mountain homes have been. We haven't seen them in multiple years. Our supply of steel and plumb helmets has gone stagnant, just as our population has. After the Forgotten Beast had wiped over half the population, the Hall of Shores hasn't recovered yet. After receiving no migrant waves for years or trade caravans, the administrators for the Hall of Shores fortress had grown increasingly anxious. After years of silence of the mountain home, they decided to take action. The once proud seat of their dwarven king and thriving center of dwarven culture, Pulley Sizzled had been a gem of dwarven culture, filled with skilled artisans and warriors and scholars. But now the ominous silence of the fort rang throughout the lands. It was time to figure out what had caused the silence. The Hall of Glees, the militia squad, was sent to Pulley Sizzled to figure out what had happened. After living through multiple sieges and monster attacks, this dwarf had seen maybe not even tens but hundreds of his kinfolk die and decay. The recruit Etor threw a tantrum, starting a fight in our taverns that was quickly ended when he was stomped out by his fellow tavern goers. His broken body was hauled down to the hospital to get fixed up before he would spend 90 days in prison. With a war being fought with multiple civilizations of these goblins, we needed to upgrade the trap hallway, ripping out some of the old serrated blades made of copper and installing new iron ones. These machines should react a little bit faster and do a bit more damage to our enemies. Down below in our caverns, we started to add walls in our second cavern. Hopefully this will soon become a almost tree farm for our dwarves, allowing us to collect wood that is not on the surface but down below, keeping our dwarves out of the sunlight as many of them do not like it and have become accustomed to living underground. We should have known the goblins were up to something, as a scout party of 5 goblin bowmen have entered our fortress. Running through the trap hallway, we cut most of them down. 4 of them dying to our traps before the final one fled for his life. The goblin was a bit too fast for our militia dwarves to catch him as he ran to our borders. After hauling goblin body after goblin body, a dwarven child named Olin started a fist fight. He punched a handful of civilians, also punched a grizzly bear at guarding our gate. The dwarven child also kicked a chicken. One of the people that he punched, an older lady named English, she was a weaver. He punched her in the neck and actually tore an artery. She passed away in the hospital just after. A were-beast in the shape of a mole attacked. It had gotten to the front gate before I got any warning of it. The were-mole stood fighting our grizzly bears and also one of our scribes. The scribe ran up with a copper pick, planting it inside of the were-mole's head and leaving it to die. Thankfully, nobody was bit or scratched, therefore we didn't have to worry about expelling anybody or locking them up to see if they would transform. Midwinter of the year 117, we sent both our militia squads, the Halls of Glee and the Thorns of the Earth, to go raid Rampart Smokes, hopefully to raise and destroy it and loot a little bit. They ended up killing 3 goblins and looting some leather armor. The counterattack to the Hall of Shores arrived almost too quickly, as a goblin force approached, bringing with them a horde of beak dogs, brutish trolls, and terrifying Maneras. The dwarves, weary from years of war, knew this would be one of the largest and most brutal assaults they had ever faced. The goblins, driven by rage from the recent attacks from the dwarves, marched through the land towards the trap corridor. The twisting trap hallway claimed many goblin lives as they charged recklessly forward. Attempting to use their numbers to their advantage, stonefall traps rained boulders on their heads, while weapon traps sliced through their armor, flesh, and bone. But despite their heavy losses, the goblin force pushed on, driven by sheer numbers and the presence of their larger, more dangerous allies in the trolls. It was the trolls who managed to breach the fortress. With their enormous strength, they smashed through the side door, creating a path to the main floors of the Hall of Shores. Screams of the citizens rang out, and the dwarven warriors rushed to defend their home. The battle was fierce and desperate, with the dwarves holding the line against the onslaught. In the chaos, a dwarf spearman, hardened by countless battles, took a stand at the stairwell leading to the heart of the fortress. As 4 trolls attempted to climb the stairs, the spearman fought with unmatched fury. Driving his spear into one after another, his skill and determination were unmatched, and he single-handedly brought down all 4 trolls, preventing them from reaching the vulnerable dwarves above in the crafting halls. The Hall of Shores held firm, but the battle was far from over. Knowing the goblins would return with even more, the dwarves needed to prepare once again. Even with the military fighting as well as it did, a couple trolls, goblins, and other foes made it onto the main floors, where civilians armed with wood-cutting axes and copper pickaxes actually managed to dispatch them, with a little help from our war grizzly bears who roamed the fortress. The history books will tell you of the battles and tell you of the great heroes, but they won't tell you about the cleanup that comes after. Even with all the bodies rotting away and its meat falling from bone and then turning into dust, our dwarves are still picking stuff up out of the trap hallway, still yet to get to the corpses or the teeth or the bones that lay on the floors. This will very easily take up the entire season for us. A thief was found in the fortress and actually managed to bypass our grizzly bears guarding the gate. With him, he had kidnapped one of our dwarven children named Olin, yet the administrators had flagged Olin as a problem child. After going crazy after a few sieges in his earlier years, this child had started many fights, and our militia squad just let him go. We'll let him be the goblins' problem. With the contact being cut off from the mountain homes and the halls of glee sent out to find out what had happened, they found goblins. The goblin civilization had occupied the fort of Pulley Sizzled, and our king and the population that had lived there were nowhere to be found. Knowing that the Hall of Shores was the last fortress for the last bit of the population of the Archland dwarves, a new barracks was being constructed. This time, not for long-term use, but for the quick and robust training for recruits. The administrators and the council gathered together and drew up war plans. They had a year to get ready, a year to build an army, a year to forge some of the best gear that they had so far, a year to breed the most ferocious war grizzly bears that this world has ever seen. So the new recruits got busy. They trained in the hallways of the new barracks, testing out their iron shields, breastplates, and weapons. The fortress was stocked with plenty of gear for them to pull from, so they had their choice on which weapons they preferred to use. The cave dragon that we stole from the goblins was assigned to the Halls of Glee commander Litast. Litast would lead the attack against the goblin foes who occupied Pulley Sizzled. While many dwarves were training for war, giant agitated dingoes attacked. These giant creatures filled the stone corridors of the trap hallway. A couple of them were actually cut down by our traps. The few that were left, we sent the dwarves and the militia squads out to attack them. We ended up losing 2 civilians along with 2 members of the militia squads in this fight. One of the giant dingoes picking up one of our swords dwarf and shaking her like a toy. All 4 dwarves were buried downstairs in the tombs, and the dingoes were tossed into the atomizer to be destroyed. An army of 50 dwarves geared up within the Hall of Shores, their faces set with grim determination. Their commander, Litast, stood with her war dragon, reminding them of Pulley Sizzled. Their once glorious mountain home had fallen. The goblins had not only occupied the fortress, but had slaughtered every dwarf inside. The halls that had once echoed with laughter, song, and the ring of hammers were now silent, defiled by an enemy. The dwarves of the Hall of Shores, few in number, were now the last of their kind. Their population had dwindled over years of war, but this final blow had kindled a fire of vengeance within their heart. They knew that to reclaim their old home was a dream long lost. but they could not let the fortress rest in the hands of their ancestral foes. The decision was made. 50 warriors, all that remained that could bear arms, would march to Pulley Sizzled. They would raze it to the ground, ensuring that if it could not belong to the dwarves, it would belong to no one. The journey would be perilous, and many knew that they may not return. But whether they made it back or fell in battle, they would take as many goblins with them as they could. The dwarves would march out, with their bears and lone dragon, their axes and hammers gleaming in the warm light. The weight of their ancestors' memory drove them forward. This was not just a battle, it was the last stand of a proud people, determined to leave their mark on a world that had long forgotten them. The Archland dwarves who had built the Hall of Shores will write their name in history with iron and blood. The silence in the fortress was unnerving, where once the sound of hammer on anvil, pick on stone, and the laughter in the halls filled the air, there was now only stillness. Dust settled slowly for half-finished projects, abandoned tools, and cold, empty forges. The great dining hall, once echoing with the feasts and songs, stood barren, as its long tables lined with untouched mugs of ale and cold meals never eaten had rotted. The administrators who were left behind and the children now knew what it was like to be in a tomb like the hundreds of their kinfolk down below in the caverns. The flames and the torches had been burning out, leaving the halls in a dim twilight. They're barely illuminated by the faint glow of the magma forges far below in the caverns. No one knew if the squads would return, but in silence there was promise. Etched into every stone, every hall, and every weapon left behind, they would either return to reclaim the halls, or they would not return at all. Until then, the fortress would wait, silent as a grave, holding its breath in the fate for the last of its dwarves. And yet that was a fate that would never come. 20 years. The Hall of Shores stood 20 years. With the last of its brave population running off the Pulley Seas to fight the goblins who had occupied their mountain home. These dwarves will never be forgotten, as their fortress still stands, every engraving, book, and statue remembering their history. The dwarves never returned. Not one out of the 50 ever returned to the fortress for a few more seasons. As far as the Hall of Shores and the Archland dwarves knows, they are still there, fighting the good fight. That was an hour and a half. I hope you enjoyed the video. That was a lot of work to do. So if you did like it or appreciate it, hit the sub button. It means a lot to me. I'm a smaller YouTuber, so the likes, comments, shares, all of that really, really is important to me. It gets my channel out there to new people, and it shows me the kind of stuff that you guys want to see. Now, like I said at the beginning, there's 1,500 plus of you that are here, and I just want to say thank you so much for subscribing and all the support that you guys have given me. Now, if you guys are interested, there's a link tree down below in my description. You can find stuff like this wherever it's at on there. So if you would like to support me in that way, I do not expect it at all. I don't think anybody will ever click on it, but also didn't think that anybody would ever really enjoy these stories that I tell. So it is there if you do want it, and I will see you guys in some future videos. There's a lot of stuff that's just like this that's getting planned, some themed fortresses. If you guys have any ideas, drop them below. I'd love to read them. I'd love to have a chit chat with you guys. There's a Discord in the description if you'd like to join that. There's not a whole lot of people in there, so it's kind of awkward right now, but if you did want to join, it is also down there. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.